Squirt guns are not just a modern invention for summertime fun. Once upon a time, they were essential pieces of equipment for firefighters, physicians, and political pundits alike. Today on the Deerskin Diary, we're going to take a look at the appearance of one squirt gun on the 18th century Kentucky frontier. So stick around. This is one hot story, and I know you're not going to want to miss it. Now to start with, these tools went by several different names. Squirt guns, squirts, fire squirts, syringes, fire syringes, just to name a few. They all worked on the same premise. It was a hollow tube with a stepped down nozzle at the end and some sort of plunger with a gasket. And the plunger and the gasket helped create the vacuum to pull water into the tube, and then you could use that same plunger to push the water out. The water coming out of a smaller diameter nozzle at the end of the tube, which would allow the water to go farther in a more predictable and aimable stream. These things weren't new either. It's believed that this type of technology was the basis for the distributor of the ancient incendiary weapon called Greek fire. Fire squirts were hand tools used by one or two firefighters for extinguishing a blaze. Though small, these tools could be useful in the same way that a fire extinguisher would be useful today. The earliest one that I have found still in existence is from 1540. They were used quite heavily during the Great Fire of London in 1666. In a smaller form, they had a use as a medical device, applying medicines to mouths and ears, much like a modern syringe but without the needle. Now, they seemingly had use also as a political tool, and if not in person, at least in print. In this artwork from 1785, Colonel Topham points a syringe at the sun, which represents the genius of Holman in an attempt to extinguish it. Now, Topham was a literary character who was a proprietor, editor, and scandalmonger of the World newspaper. Holman's character was a rising stage celebrity and opponent of Topham. This famous piece of art was drawn by the 18th century caricaturist Thomas Rowlandson. This political cartoon is called The Violent Attack, or the Discharge of Water Artillery, and it depicts a scene from 1784 where three political rivals to the king squirt water at him, a king's ally blocking the streams. One of the characters seems to be saying we should fill these with aqua fortis, which is nitric acid. In another Rowlandson caricature, a doctor uses a squirt to defend himself from a mob of angry villagers. Closer to home though, the squirt gun makes an appearance on the Kentucky frontier, but in a much more critical role. In September of 1778, beleaguered residents at the settlements of Boonesborough found themselves besieged by Shawnees and their British allies. For 7 days, the attackers attempted to weaken the fort enough to seize it, and at one point the Shawnee apparently shot fire arrows at the fort in an attempt to set it ablaze. Squire Boone was Daniel Boone's younger brother. And he also happened to be a resident at Boonsborough and one of the forters, or somebody who was in the fort during the siege itself. Now, he was known as a craftsman and a little bit of an inventor as well. And while he was wounded during the initial phase of the attack, he was actually shot through the shoulder as he was running back into the fort. He spent most of the rest of the siege laid up in his bed with a broadaxe for protection. But he looked for other ways to help as well. Squire Boone reportedly made squirt guns out of old gun barrels. He used ramrods and wooden gaskets, although this one is leather, to produce these firefighting tools that allowed the occupants of the fort to put out small blazes without having to leave the safety of their structures. I read this historically odd fact and I had to try it out for myself. Now, my version is based on what few secondhand accounts exist, and they're from sources like A New History of Kentucky and the Filson Quarterly. Now, the accounts indicate that Squire Boone used old gun barrels to make these squirt guns. I've seen both smoothbore and rifle barrels used to retell the tale. I used an old rifle barrel here, and he also apparently used wooden gaskets. My talents don't allow me to make a wooden gasket that would equate to the inside diameter of this barrel, so I'm using a leather one on the end of this ramrod, and I've got it attached with a standard ball pulling attachment here and it's just kind of wedged between there, and this ball puller's screwed into place at the end of this wiping stick or cleaning rod. Now, of course, we have to account for the vent of the barrel itself. There's no breech in this gun. It's been removed to create this hollow tube. And then I've actually got, it's a piece of metal, embarrassingly enough, that's broken off into this vent here. I was trying to clean it out with a small drill bit, and the drill bit broke. So I can tell you that this is actually airtight now. I don't have to use a wooden stick or anything to plug the end of this. And what it's going to do is with the placement of the ramrod and the gasket in the end, once this gasket swells with water, I can actually create a vacuum by pulling water into the barrel. And that is going to fill this barrel with water. Now, we need to step the end of the barrel down to a smaller diameter. This large, I don't know, 54, 58 caliber barrel needs to have a smaller nozzle, and I don't know how they did that. The way that I'm doing that now is actually to utilize some pieces of river cane that I've got 2 pieces here. This string that's on this piece of river cane on the back is simply because it started to split on me. And I've got it shaved down to where it fits in the end of the barrel. And then I've got another smaller piece that fits in the end of the larger piece. So I can go from a large diameter barrel to a smaller diameter to the smallest diameter. And what that's going to do is create the pressure inside the barrel. So as the water comes down the barrel, is plunged down the barrel with that plunger, it's going to hit this smaller diameter, and it's going to create more pressure, which is going to shoot the water out in a smaller diameter that's actually somewhat aimable. I like the way that works. Now keep in mind, the concept of this is that you can do this from behind cover. Otherwise it would make no sense, right? We could just dump the bucket of water right on top of the fire. I happen to be at Martin Station this weekend, and we actually have a fort. So let's go inside the fort and see what we can do shooting out one of the portholes. In this demonstration, you can see I'm firing the squirt gun from the gap between 2 logs in the loft of one of the cabins. And I'm able to aim it and get that stream shot directly at that arrow in the wall. And that output of water may be enough to at least dampen the blaze set by one of those flaming arrows. Now, the arrow's not on fire for very obvious reasons. This was a fun little summertime project to experiment with. It took me a few tries to get it right, but it gave me an opportunity to experience a piece of 18th century material culture that, quite frankly, I didn't think or knew ever existed at the time. But more importantly, it gave me more time to spend with you, and I can't tell you how much that means to me. I appreciate your time and your support as always, and we'll see you next time on the Deerskin Diary.